Welcome back to Mr. DuPage's classroom. Today we will be reviewing basic arithmetic, exponents, and order of operations. This is for my CP Algebra 1 class for Friday, August 5th. Let's get into the lesson.
All right, the first thing we need to do here is the date in the upper right-hand corner. That would be August 5th, like I said. The warm-up, I would like you to try on your own. You will have about 2 minutes. The warm-up is right here. It is problems 1 through 12. You'll have about 2 minutes. I will give you a timer, and go, please. And pencils down, please. All right, let's see how you did. Problem number 1 should have been negative 16. Problem 2 should have been negative 8. Problem 3 should have been 16. Problem 4 should have been 4 over 3. We'll talk about how to do that in 1 second if you did not get that. Problem 5, negative 20. Problem 6 should be 5 over 14. Problem 7 is negative 39. 8 is 20. 9 is 1. 10 is negative 5. 11 is negative 3. And 12 is 9. Now, looking at problems 4 and 6, the first thing you need to remember is we have to have common denominators. The denominator is the bottom number of our fraction, so we need to find a way to make this 5 into a 15. In order to do that, we would have to multiply the 5 by 3. Anything that I multiply the denominator by, I also must multiply the numerator by. So I'd take the 8 times 3 and the 5 times 3. So I'd have negative 4 over 15 minus negative 24 over 15. Anytime that you have a negative minus a negative, so I have negative 14 over 15 minus a negative 24 over 15, I can change that to a positive or an addition sign. When I do that, I will end up with 20 over 15. You just add the numerators only. In order to simplify that, I would divide the 20 and the 15 by 5 because they're both divisible by 5 to get 4 over 3. That is the same process you would use on number 6. Number 9, we're just going to multiply straight across. So it would be the negative 2 times the negative 3, which would get me positive 6, over 3 times 2, which would get me positive 6. Well, 6 over 6 would equal 1. 10, you would just take the 20 times the negative 1. It would get you negative 20 over 4. That simplifies to negative 5. If there are any other questions on any of those, please make sure you raise your hand and ask. Now, how did you do? Hopefully, you got most of those correct. Notes on arithmetic, adding and subtracting. If we take and we subtract a negative, an example would be 3 minus negative 2. What we're really doing is taking 3 plus 2. A negative and a negative can turn into a positive. So then we just add those up at the end. This would get me 5. We would change the 2 negatives to a positive. Okay. If I add 2 negatives, an example would be negative 3 minus or plus negative 3. That's just going to get me a larger negative. So my answer would be negative 6. A negative 3 plus a negative 3 would get me a negative 6. If I subtract a positive from a negative, it's also going to make a larger negative. An example would be negative 3 minus 3. That means the exact same thing as the adding 2 negatives. Negative 3 minus 3 would also be negative 6. Finally, overall, your answer is going to take on the sign. We'll take the sign of the larger number. Okay? Multiplying and dividing. If I take a positive and I multiply or divide by a positive, that will equal a positive. If I take a positive and multiply or divide by a negative, that will be a negative. If I take a negative and multiply or divide by a positive, be the same as the one we just looked at a minute ago, it'll be a negative. Finally, if I take a negative and multiply or divide by a negative, it will be a positive. The last part, fractions. When we add or subtract fractions, we need to get like denominators. We talked about that just a minute ago. Then we will just add or subtract. Whoops. Should have been an or. We just add or subtract the numerators, or the top of the fraction. We saw that a second ago. If we're multiplying or dividing, we will just multiply straight across. Multiply the numerators by the numerators, and multiply the denominators by the denominators. Then you need to simplify. If I'm dividing, then I would actually cross multiply. When I divide, I would actually cross multiply. Or it's also known as multiplying by the reciprocal. Okay? At the end of that, you always need to simplify. Always need to simplify. If there are any questions over that first warm-up or any of the add, subtract, multiply, divide, or fraction sections, please make sure when the video is done you ask, okay? Next thing we're going to look at is exponents. The big number 2 here, there's a special name for the big number 2. That is going to be our base. That is going to be our base. The smaller number, the 4, is actually known as an exponent. Some of you may know that as a power. What this means is I'm going to take the base. If you look down here, I'm going to take the base and multiply it by itself as many times as the exponent tells me to. That's why in the 2 raised to the 4 down here in this example right here, we have 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. I took 2 multiplied by itself 4 times. That will get us 16. What I would like you to do now is go ahead and try 3 raised to the 3rd power. Write that down and try that problem. I will give you 30 seconds to do so. I'm going to start the timer right now. Pencils down, please. 3 raised to the 3rd power. 3 raised to the 3rd power is going to be 3 times 3 times 3, which is 27. 27. We have another try this problem. Let me go ahead. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to do this as well. Try to remember order of operations. You have 30 seconds. I'm going to start the timer now. Pencils down, please. All right, this is how we're going to work through this problem. Remember, order of operations tells us we should divide or multiply first. So the first thing we would do is take 3, leave 3 plus 5, and the negative. I'm going to take 6 and divide it by 2. 6 divided by 2 would be 3. Then I can just add or subtract straight across. So 3 plus 5 is 8 minus 3. 8 minus 3 is 5. That should have been your final answer. Some common mistakes here. The first one, people will add the 3 and the 5 together first. People will add the 3 and the 5 together first to get 8 minus 6 divided by 2. Then they'll go ahead and take the 8 minus the 6, which would give them 2 divided by 2. Do not do that. This is not correct. Also, the next thing that they will do is they'll take the 5 minus the 6 first. So we'd have 3 minus 1 divided by 2. 3 minus 1 divided by 2 would give me 2 divided by 2. And that would get me 1. That is also not correct. Do not do that. Let's move on to the back here. Order of operations. The first step to order of operations, some of you may have learned PEMDAS. PEMDAS. The first step to PEMDAS is that we will do the parentheses first. Parentheses, or the P in PEMDAS, the parentheses will be the grouping symbols. There's parentheses and there are brackets. For these purposes right now, we'll just talk about the parentheses. Anytime that you see a grouping symbol, do what is inside of there first. Then you want to simplify the exponents. That is the E portion of our PEMDAS. So we want to evaluate any of the exponents that we can, or simplify them. The third step will be to multiply, and divide. Multiply and divide. That's the M and the D of PEMDAS. Those actually work together. So anytime you see a multiplication problem within your expression, you need to do that portion first. Then you need to do a division portion, and we want to do those in order from left to right. The last step is to add and subtract. Add and subtract. That will be the last portion, the A and the S. Again, we'll just do those from left to right. An acronym that people have used in the past would be, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. I'm sure there are some others as well. But that's an easy way to try to remember your order of operations. So we want to make sure that we do those in order. Parentheses or grouping symbols, then exponents, then we multiply and divide, then we add and subtract. The first one let's do together. First thing we're looking for are grouping symbols. In problem number 1, there are no grouping symbols. So that means that we've checked off our first step. There are no grouping symbols. We'll move on to our second step, which is to simplify exponents. If we simplify exponents, we have 2 raised to the second power. We're going to write down everything else. Just bring it down. What is 2 raised to the second power? Well, that would just be 2 times 2, which is 4. The next step, we're going to look for multiplication or division. I do have multiplication right here. So I'm going to go ahead and simplify that. Negative 8 times 2 would get me negative 16. Bring down the plus 4. Last step is to look for addition and subtraction. Well, we have 30 minus 16. 30 minus 16 would get me 14. So we have 14 plus 4. Final step is to add those together. Final answer would be 18. Problem number 2. The first step we want to complete are the parentheses. The first set of parentheses right here. I'm going to bring down that 3. 8 plus 2 is 10. Leave the subtraction sign. Inside these parentheses, I still need to follow order of operations. So the first thing I want to do is actually evaluate that 4 squared. 4 times 4 is 16. So then we have 16 minus 10. Have I completely simplified that second set of parentheses yet? No, I have not. So I'm going to go ahead and do 3 times 10 still. Minus, what's 16 times 10? Well, that is 6. Whenever I have something outside of a parenthesis and I have simplified everything on the inside of the parenthesis, this is really a multiplication problem. So I want to multiply. So 3 times 10 would be 30. This is really negative 1 times 6, so that would be negative 6. 30 minus 6 would end up being 24. If you use order of operations on those problems, they're actually not overly difficult. Looking at problem number 3, the division or the fraction sign means divide. The fraction sign means divide. We will not do that to start with. I know according to order of operations we want to do multiplication and division before adding and subtracting, but this is a little bit of a special case. We're going to take care of the entire numerator first and the entire denominator first, then we'll worry about dividing. So the first step of this problem, I don't have any grouping symbols, I don't have any exponents, so the first step will be taking the 20 and dividing by 4. I'm going to move all this over here. So I'd have 4 plus 20 divided by 4 is 5 over 2. Again, stay just in your numerator. What is the next step in order of operations? Well, it's addition and subtraction. So 4 plus 5 would be 9 divided by 2. You could write that as 4.5 or 4.5. I prefer that you write it either in this form or in decimal form. The 9 over 2 is actually the most it's the simplest form, and it will stay, or there's no rounding involved, so it's actually the most accurate as well. Go ahead and try to evaluate in number 4. What I mean by evaluate, we're going to take 2 and put it in for all the C's, and take 5 and put it in for all the D's, and you're going to come up with a number value. I will give you 1 minute to do so. I'm going to start the timer now. Remember, I'm just going to take the 2 and put it in for all the C's. I'm going to take the 5 and put it in for all the D's. And also remember that something along the lines of 2D just really means multiplication. And time, please put your pencils down. Let's look at the answers for 4A and 4B. In order to take the 5 and put it in for the D, I will take 2 times the 5 minus 4 times 2 for each C value divided by 2. According to order of operations, we need to take care of our parentheses first. And 2 parenthesis 5, 4 parenthesis 2 really is just multiplication. So we would take the 2 times the 5 first, which is a 10. Keep our negative sign there. We take the 4 times the 2, which is 8. Then we would divide by 2. Looking at order of operations from this line, I have 10 minus 8 divided by 2. The first step is going to be to divide 8 and 2. So it would leave me with 10 minus 4, because 8 divided by 2 is 4. Finally, I can go ahead and take 10 minus 4. That will give me 6. So my final answer should have been 6. Looking at D, actually over here, it would be 4. Put a 5 in for every D value. Put a 2 in for every C value. Plus 5 squared. First step to order of operations is always taking care of the grouping symbols first. So it would be 4 times 5 minus 2 would be 3 plus 5 squared. What is the next step in order of operations? It would be to take care of the exponent. So I'd have 4 times 3 plus 25. Next step in order of operations, looking for multiplication or division. Well, right here I have 4 times 3, so that would give me 12 plus 25. Last step is addition or subtraction. 12 plus 25 is 37. Last thing we're going to look at today is absolute value. Absolute value is the distance a number is from 0 on a number line. There are vertical bars around the number or phrase. It looks like this right here. It's always positive because it's a distance. A distance cannot be negative. I did not travel negative distance, whether I'm going forward or backward. I didn't travel negative distance. I traveled a certain amount of distance, just depends on which direction you're going. So let's evaluate this negative 5. If I put a point at negative 5 on my number line, here is 0. How many units from negative 5 to 0? Well, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 units. So my absolute value of negative 5 would actually just be 5, would be my answer. So we look at number 1. How many units from 0 is the number 125? Well, again, it is 125 units. How many units from 0 is negative 7? It is just 7. 3. Now we actually have a subtraction problem. We need to still use order of operations. So what is negative 2 minus 9? It would be negative 11. The absolute value of negative 11 is 11. Go ahead and try number 4. I will give you about 30 seconds to do so. And the timer has started. Remember your order of operations and then take the absolute value at the end. You can also treat absolute value bars like they are parentheses. They are a grouping symbol. So if we ever have an absolute value and then other numbers outside of it, you want to make sure you take care of the absolute value first. And pencils down, please. Looking at number 4, I have an exponent. So the first thing I want to do is actually evaluate the exponent. So 3 squared is 3 times 3, which is 9. Then I have minus 5 times 2. What is the next step in absolute value? Make sure these bars are big enough so it doesn't look like that's a 19 or a 21. I want to go ahead and take the negative 5 times the 2. So my absolute value would be 9 minus 10. What is 9 minus 10? That is negative 1. The absolute value of negative 1 is actually 1. So that would be our final answer for that absolute value problem. And stop.
Three, two, one, and go. And that concludes our lesson on basic arithmetic, exponents, and absolute value, also order of operations. Remember PEMDAS, parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, and then addition and subtraction. That is one of the most important parts of the lesson we did today. Also remember that absolute value can be a grouping symbol, and absolute value is really just the distance on a number line from 0. Your assignment for this lesson is going to be the worksheet you should have picked up on the way in the door. It is going to be worksheet 1.2, 2.1 to 2.5. If you have any questions about this assignment, please feel free to raise your hand, and have a good day.